Hey everyone, Cleo from the future here, just letting you know before you dive into this video that this video is basically going to be me explaining the concept, which is pretty clear from the title, and going into the books that I want to be reading for this challenge, and then the actual reading vlog of me throughout the month finishing these books, picking some up and things like that. But if you want to skip all of that and you just want a look at the 13 books that I read and the thoughts about them, then just watch my wrap-up video, which will be up very shortly as well. I will link it down below as soon as it is up. And in that wrap-up video, of course, I will just be talking about my thoughts about the 13 books. So decide for yourself what you want to do. If you want to see both of them, perfect. But in this case, if you're just like getting bored with me like reading, me talking about them multiple times as I'm going through them, then definitely know that you could also just choose for the shorter format. But so yeah, without further ado, let's dive into the video. Hey everyone, Cleo here and welcome to 2020. So today I'm giving you my January secret TBR. So normally I will have already done a video about like TBRs and my discussion about them, because I'm planning to make this one a long video and not my TBR video. And in that one I discussed how I don't always want to have a fixed TBR just because I'm too good with TBRs in a way, as in I don't find it easy to digress from them. So for the month of January I decided that I wasn't going to make a TBR, but then at some point I got like a very good idea for a secret TBR that I really wanted to do, and so that's what I'm doing now. I don't know whether this will fill my entire month, and I don't know what I'll do once I finish this. Maybe I'll continue along the same strain, maybe I will just pick up something random after that. But so my idea for the month of January is to read the under 200 page books on my unread shelves. So I have gone through all 147 books that are on my unread shelves at the moment. I'm trying to reduce them, and if I do this, I will get 13 out of this list done. Now mind you, these 13 aren't all under 200 pages, and that's because of series. So there is a fourth book in the series which is under 200 pages. The third book is just over 200 pages, so I will be adding both of these into my list. So the entire pile consists of 13 books. We'll try to move them up. Here they are, and I will go through them one by one. I don't think I'm going to be reading them in order of like shortest to longest, just because I want to give myself the liberty to just like pick something up that I really want to in the whole like atmosphere of having no TBR, which I skipped in the sense of having a secret TBR, but okay. So I will introduce these things to you in terms of shortest page count to longest page count. And mind you, I'm also going off of the Goodreads page count in terms of like their being under 200 pages, so who knows, there might be this like a stowaway or a castaway in here. So the first book clocks in at 53 pages, and that is a book by Tolstoy. It's a short story. It's How Much Land Does a Man Need? Second one is shortly following after that, because it's also from the Penguin short story collection, and it's 55 pages, and it's The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen. Next up, in terms of the amount of pages according to Goodreads, at 124 pages we get to The Body Artist by Delillo. Next up is a book by an author of which I've read a previous work and that I absolutely fell in love with. It clocks in at 148 pages. And it is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Next up, we get the first part of a series which I have on my shelves for a very long time. I have actually already read the first book at some point, but I have mainly forgotten most of it. So it clocks in at 162 pages, and that is The Bad Beginning by Lemony Snicket. So it is the first book in a series of unfortunate events. Next up is another book that I have tried to start already for another sort of like for another project, and I didn't really follow through on it, but I hope to now really put all my intention on this. It clocks in at 163 pages, and that is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Next up we get Live for Sale from Yukio Mishima. So there are quite a little bit of like Asian literature in here. Next up is the second book in the series of unfortunate events, the Reptile Room. This one has, let's get to the end. This one has 190 pages, so getting close to that 200 page mark. Next up is a book by Yoko Ogawa. I think her name is Yoko Ogawa. It just mentions the last name here. Yes, Yoko Ogawa, and that is the Housekeeper and the Professor. Next up, did I say the page count for the Housekeeper and the Professor? No, I don't think so. So also 180 pages long. So it's actually shorter than one of the books that I mentioned earlier. I guess it's just due to the Goodreads edition. Sometimes they mention like some of the pages that you have at the end that I don't really count, so 180 is what I'm gonna say. Next up, so these are acknowledgements, I'm not counting them, a book list, not counting them, an afterword, not counting it. So at 194 pages we have Dear Friend, From My Life I Write to Your Life by Yi-Yoon Lee. Next up is book 4 in the unfortunate series, the series of unfortunate events, and that is The Miserable Mill, right? Yes. So this one is shorter than the third one actually, which I'll also be reading, but so this one clocks in at 194 pages. Next up is a classic of literature, which I'm kind of dreading because it's supposed to be written in some like stream of consciousness style, which I don't always get along with, and that is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, clocking in at 198 pages. And the final book, so it's not really under 200 pages, but I do want to read it just because I need to read it. Its sequel is under 200 pages, but this one is pretty close. It clocks in at 214 pages, and it's the third book in the series of unfortunate events, and this is The White Window. So these are the 13 books that I plan to get around to over the course of this video. As I said before, I will just be picking them up at random. I don't have a particular order in which I want to read these ones. I do think that just to get things started, I want to start with one of the two short stories that I had first, just in order to like get my Goodreads stats going at the beginning of the month, and then I'll just be picking up based on my preference. I don't know whether I'll be spreading out the series of unfortunate events or whether I'll be continuing on in one track, for example. So the book that I chose to continue with now is The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. As I said in the beginning, this is a book about a professor who loses his memory every 80 minutes. So he only has 80 minutes of memory. The way it works, it isn't like every 80 minutes his memory is reset, but he just constantly has a spool of like his memory is constantly of the last 80 minutes. So if he were to see you for 80 minutes long, that would mean that at that point you have to reintroduce yourself because he will have forgotten you. However, you can spend 5 hours with him, and if you're constantly in his sight, he will remember you throughout that period, because it's just constantly like the 80th minutes is being overwritten with the new first minute, let's call it like that. That's very confusing. But so I hope you understand that, because that was really badly explained. But so at the beginning of our story, this housekeeper is sent to work for the professor. A lot of people have already gotten fired or have decided not to work for him anymore, because they have either like they might have taken advantage of his situation, but we don't all know all of the circumstances for all of these people who've gotten fired. And so our housekeeper is actually getting along quite well with the professor at this point, and what she's finding very fascinating is his love for mathematics, which is kind of his way to reach out to people, and also his way to keep a handle on the situation. Now that's also one of the wonderful things that I've discovered about this book, is that the mathematics in it is actually fascinating. Now I studied mathematics, so in a sense I already have somewhat of a fascination with mathematics, but I would definitely not call myself a mathematics geek. But throughout this book we are introduced to some interesting mathematical concepts that maybe were introduced to us in school. I don't remember at this point. Some of them definitely were, but they were explained, they were integrated into the story in such a fascinating way that it actually becomes interesting. But so yeah, I'm about 55 pages of the way in at the moment, and this book is 180 pages. I don't know whether I'll finish today. It would be nice to actually be able to finish all of the, to finish a book every single day, but probably not. So I'll check in with you guys later when I have actually finished this one. So I finished the second book for the year. I finished The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa, and I really loved it. This is going to be my first 5-star read for the year. I just love Japanese literature. I've heard somebody describe it recently, what they loved about Japanese literature, and that's what I've realized I've also come to like, is that it has a certain lightness to it, you know. It's not necessarily going to produce the biggest plots or plot twists or anything like that. It's very light, very flowy, very airy, and this book definitely also falls within that category, because I think if this were like I'm not saying, of course, that there are no exceptions, but the way that I would have expected this plot to roll out is that we would have learned some key facts about the professor's past and how this influenced the behaviors he was showing now, how this showed like the reasons for his overprotectiveness for the boy, for example. And it totally didn't do that at all. It always stayed away from that. It was only just focusing on the now, and I think that these types of decisions that the books are making are the decisions that I love in these books. I'm looking for the other ones, but I'm always happy with the way that Japanese literature plays with its premise and its plot. So basically, I normally already gave you a premise, but so basically what the book is mostly about this sort of like this strong bond that is being made throughout the book. It's not very much about plot developments or anything like that, as I told you before. It's very much about how these three people find each other and develop a sort of like common language through the use of this passion that the professor has for mathematics, but also through his love for baseball. So we constantly have references to them talking about mathematics, but also to the professor using mathematics in order to learn to get to know people, but also to deal with certain situations in life, you know, when certain difficult discussions or difficult situations pop up. Mathematics is usually the way out, but they also often are seen talking together about baseball, and we're not just following the story of this relationship between these three people, but we're also somewhat following the story of their favorite baseball team throughout this book. I really loved it. We never get to know the names of the characters, and that just gives it a little bit more of a transcendent feeling. It's not about these individual characters, it's more or less about the relationship that they've developed between themselves. So I thought it was a wonderful case of Japanese literature, really one of the favorite ones for me now at this point, and I will definitely be reading more Yoko Ogawa in the future. I've already checked out some of her books on script. I haven't listened to them, of course, but I've already like put some on my list for things that I want to read. But so yeah, I really loved it, really did. In case it wasn't clear, I really did love it. But so I've moved on to my third book for this challenge. And since I have to read 4 books in this series, I decided that I would go ahead and start on a series of unfortunate events at this point. I have at some point read one of the first books, so I do think that this is a reread for me, though I never marked it on Goodreads apparently. But yeah, it is definitely a reread for me. But so this is definitely children literature, and as far as I've been getting into it, I've kind of been wondering whether I want to finish it or not, just because it's definitely like not written for my age, and it's very clearly not written for my age, you know. It will constantly be talking about like difficult words and explaining them. However, I do also like the sort of looking at this text from an adult perspective, so in a very like nice way in which certain things have been phrased. For example, like if you have ever lost someone very important to you, then you already know how it feels, and if you haven't, you cannot possibly imagine it. These are very like nice, beautiful phrases that even if you look at it as an adult, you you have to admire the way that he manages to put something that heavy in such a simple and effective way. And there are many examples of these throughout the book so far. So basically, if you don't know what a series of unfortunate events is, it is a series. I think it was most of the books were published in the 2000s, so this is the first book. It was still published in 1999, but I think the conclusion of the series was already done in the 2000s. So and it's a series about the Baudelaire orphans. So at the beginning of the story, these three siblings, Violet, Klaus and Sunny, they are informed that their parents were killed in a horrible horrible accident, so their house burned down, and so the kids become orphans. And in the first book they are sent off to live with a distant relative of theirs, but he is the closest relationship to them in terms of where he lives. And so they move to his house, but he is a very cruel man and he seems to be out for their fortune. And I think in the series as a whole we will always be going back to this certain character of Count Olaf, who's trying to get his hands on the Baudelaire fortune as it is described. So it's very light, but I do like, as I said, these sort of instances of Lemony Snicket using simple language to explain difficult concepts. So there's also, for example, a very short but very clear explanation about the difference between figuratively and literally, for example. And he then always does a sort of like play within the rest of the text with a certain concept that he explains. For example, as well, when he explains a certain language element, for example, oftentimes he will then reuse that language element in a sort of funny way. But so yeah, I'm enjoying it so far, but it is very breezy, so I'm going to be flying through this in no time. I hope to be getting around to a fourth book today, and I will check in with you guys later when I get there in order to see, because as I said at the beginning of this video, I'm really just deciding on the moment, so it's going to be spur of the moment what I'm going for. So about a week has passed since I last updated you guys, so it is now the 10th? I don't even know the dates. No, the 11th. So it's Saturday the 11th of January at the moment, and I have finished 4 books at this point, and I think I'm going to be finishing my 5th one today. But so I'll first talk about the 2 extra books that I finished. So obviously, compared to my last checkup, I finished The Bad Beginning, so the first book in the series of unfortunate events. Now, based on finishing this book, I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to be finishing this entire series over the course of the year or maybe later. I do think I'm still going to try and finish the 4 books in the series that are on my secret TBR for this month, and then I'll decide, because they do have like charm to them and I do like them, but they're also not very, like, they're nothing special to me anymore. I think this is very much something that you need to read on a younger age, or maybe something that if you've read it on a younger age, it'll give you nostalgia to read it back. But for a first time read at the age of 31, it's very juvenile, and it's a little bit like I'm not getting as much out of it as I want to be getting out of it. But so I want to be trying the first 4 just to see, but I do fear that they're going to be a little bit formulaic, and so that every book is going to be a little bit reminiscent of the previous one. And so if that is the case, then I will stop after 4, and I will donate my books to the library so that young kids can be reading them. But I'll be trying for the first 4, and then we'll see if I continue or not. But so I liked it one, but as I said before, it didn't really give me everything that I wanted to. And then I finished another book, and basically I actually read it like 1.5 times or something, because more than half of this book I actually read twice. And that's because it was something quite difficult for me to wrap my head around or to keep following in a way, and that is Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life by Yi Lee. This book is a book that she wrote while she was suffering from a depression, and it is in that sense a memoir. It is somewhat like a collection of essays about, basically that's the problem that I have with the book. It seemed to, like, I didn't even know until I finished it that people consider it to be a collection of essays, and that actually makes a lot more sense, and I wish that I had read it in that sense, because I considered it to be like a book as a whole, and in that sense it felt a little bit disjointed at times. So from time to time I would feel like, okay, I'm getting everything that she's reading in the moment when I'm reading it or when I'm listening to it, because I also listen to the audiobook for this one, but I'm not really like getting the connections between every single part. And so I would often reread or re-listen to a certain part and then always feel like, yeah, I do get what she's saying, but for some reason or another this wouldn't connect fully, and I didn't feel like I had this one big conjoined story or anything like that. But in the end, in her afterwards, she also talks about these things. So at some point she says like, it would be, so she's talking about a essay that somebody says, and then she says that sentences and paragraphs were written and rewritten under different circumstances, arguments reframed, thoughts revised. Most of these essays took a year or longer to write, so coherence and consistency are not what I have been striving for. So basically what she's saying and afterwards is that what I've been feeling throughout, this sense of like disjointment between different chapters in this book, is basically something that happened and that she didn't try to combat. So in that sense, like, who am I to say that this should have been done differently? I think maybe if I reread it and really considered it to be a collection of essays, I might also have a different opinion about it. But altogether, I don't dislike this book. I really liked it. I liked the tone of it, and I liked the arguments that she was making throughout. So I did feel like there were very strong arguments in there, there were very beautiful quotes in there, but this disjointedness was what was kind of keeping me from fully grasping the story. And I definitely want to reread it actually, because I do feel like if I were to reread it and deep dive into it, I would get a lot more out of it still. So I enjoyed it. I don't know how to rate it just because of this experience of feeling like I didn't fully grasp what I read. But so just to make things clear, I definitely want to be checking out more by her, because I did love her language. I really marked a lot of these quotes in her book because I really loved them. And so, as I said, the only thing that was kind of negative for me was that I was feeling like I wasn't fully grasping the overall like strain of her argument, but that was then also because she wasn't necessarily making an overall statement. She was basically giving some certain essays. So I want to be giving another of her work a go, preferably a fiction work, just to see like how this style translates into a work of fiction. But so I've been enjoying it very much. At this moment, as I said before, I'm currently almost done with a 5th book. I will talk more about that when I'm done with it, because I'm already like super close to finishing it, so I won't go into the premise. I am also currently reading the 2nd book in the series of unfortunate events, so I'm reading the Reptile Room. However, I'm like only 1 chapter into this at this point. And I'll probably be spreading that out a little bit more. I think the other book that I'm reading is the priority read, and then I'll see after I finish that one which one of the other books in the pile is going to be picked up. So I still have 7 books left in the pile of under 200 page books. So we're a few days further into the month. It is now the midway point of the month, so we're the 15th of January, and I finished 3 more books. So this is a Japanese novel. The author has won many accolades in Japan, and this is the first book of her, I think, that has been translated into English. It has been really thriving as well in the English language community. A lot of people have been reading it, and so I finally picked it up as well, and I really love it. And for such a short book, it's really something that I definitely recommend to everybody, because you can easily get through it. And so I don't think it's for everybody, but I really enjoyed it, and I really want more people to discover this little book. So in this story we are following our protagonist called Keiko, and Keiko is a little bit of a special case. So some people have said that she is probably on the spectrum somewhere. So what's different about her is she's having some difficulties, for example, with social cues, but she also has a very different way of processing things in her mind. So she has different responses than the majority of the population would have. So for example, at some point there's a fight between two kids on the schoolyard, and somebody's telling them stop them, and she takes a shovel and attacks one of the kids with the shovel to make them stop, because she feels like that's the easiest way to make them stop. So this is not really the way that the majority of the people would react to a situation like this, but this is one of the examples of how she has a very different pattern in her mind for how to deal with situations. And so the same goes for social cues. So when the conversations are taking place, she has some difficulties understanding like what reaction she should feel towards this news. And so usually she's just like waiting to see what other people's reaction is and then kind of copying their behavior. And throughout life, that's actually what she's doing. She's trying to be normal in a sense, and so she's copying the way of speaking of people around her, copying the way that people dress themselves and things like that. So she becomes a sort of like gathering of the people around her. But this is also something that is being commented on, is also the way that everybody in a sense does this. So everybody in her life, when she comes across them, she feels like they've developed a little bit different way of speaking, and that is probably due to the different people circling in their life. And I definitely do feel like there's truth to that. I do feel like there are certain phrases, certain ways of speaking that become part of like your group dynamic. There are certain things that certain patterns that develop between people in groups, and so indeed we do become part of like the people around us in that sense. And indeed we might also not always, of course, be adapting certain parts of our style and things like that to fit with the way other people in our lives are doing it. But she does this, so she very much clearly does this to an extreme that she doesn't really have like an own style or an own voice. She's very much copying that of others. And she's found the perfect job for herself working in a convenience store, because she's even given a manual there and a training on how to deal with customers. So she's learning how to address them, the perfect tone of voice to deal with customers, a way to respond to certain questions or certain remarks that the customers might have. So this job is really ideal for her. But by keeping this job, she's also going against the strain of what is normal in society. So even though she's found a way to function as a normal human being, staying in this job is not considered normal. People expect her to be looking for a better job, to be looking for a full-time job, because she's also only part-time in a convenience store. So her staying in this situation is very much seen as something abnormal, something out of the norm. Also, she's still without a partner, she's still single, which is also something that is not really considered to be the norm in society. So this is very much a book that is going to be looking at what it means to conform, about conformity and the sort of like need of society for people to conform. And so her life is somewhat disrupted when a new employee is entering into the workforce. And he's very much more of a lackluster employee. So he thinks that the convenience store is beneath him. He's very much slacking on the job the entire time. He's late. He doesn't see what's kind of wrong in the store, so if something needs to be restocked or anything like that, it always needs to be pointed out to him. He's very much not in tune with that. And while our main character is initially very annoyed with him, certain things also develop that will have an impact on her life later on as well. As I said before, this is very much a story about conformity, about the way society expects you to behave, and the way society deals with you, or the difficulties people have in society of dealing with those who stand outside of it. So in that sense, I could also say that it's like it manages, in its 162 pages or something like that, it manages to do what The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand tried to do so much better and so much more effective, even though it only needs 160 pages to get at its conclusion, rather than the 720 pages of The Fountainhead. And so a very interesting book for you guys to look at. I really enjoyed this. This is another 5-star read for me for this month. Next up I read The Body Artist by Don Delillo. So Don Delillo is a well-known author. I think one of his most famous works is Underworld or Falling Man. I have not read anything else by him except for this, The Body Artist now. And I must say I was not enjoying it. I ended up rating this 2 stars. Initially I didn't want to rate it because it's the type of book where at the end of this I was like, what did I read? And a lot of times when I have a book like that, I'm like, okay, I'll leave the rating out because I really don't know how to place the book that I just read. But with this one I really much felt like, what did I read? But I also felt like I didn't enjoy the reading neither. So in this we are following a woman who loses her husband at the beginning of this book, and basically the rest of the storyline is a bit unclear because it's very much unclear what is really happening, what is her imagining things, what is her is the writer just placing, is the writer just visualizing what is happening in her mind, or are these things really happening, and if they are happening, what is taking place? Because it's never really explained what is happening. So we have a certain character pop up in her life, and he's very much reminiscent of a ghost, and so there are many reviews out there questioning who is this presence in her house. Is it a ghost? Is it really her husband? Is it somebody who's just basically crashing that house and who's basically going along with her storyline? But in any case, this book was very much about dealing with grief, about questions of identity. So she is what is referred to as a body artist, so she kind of transforms her body in different shapes, and at the end of the book she goes through a real big shape-shifting performance. And so it's very much also about changing into things, and also about the influences of others. So her speech pattern starts to change at certain periods and things like that. But it's also very much about the limitations of language, to describe what you are experiencing. And that's very clear because I didn't know what she was experiencing based on this. I was very much unaware of what I was very much kept in the dark, and I really didn't enjoy the experience neither. So for me, this wasn't a nice experience. It was a good thing that it was short. It was just only 120 pages, and also I just wanted to know what was happening. So I was hoping that maybe I was going to get something more. Sometimes, you know, I like things to be vague, to be like very symbolic or things like that, and for things to be kept up in the air. But in this case I really felt like I was kept so far in the air that I just really needed some strings to pull me down and to ground me. And so this really wasn't the perfect reading experience for me. And then the third book that I finished in the time since my last update is The Reptile Room by Lemony Snicket. So this is the second book in the series of unfortunate events. So I said that I was quite disappointed with the first one in a way, because I felt like, yeah, I wasn't the target audience anymore, and that was so clear, and I couldn't necessarily enjoy it too much neither because it was so childlike, and so it was very much yeah, explaining vocabulary every few seconds and things like that, and it was over-explanatory for my enjoyment in any case. Also, I had already read this book at some point, and so I already knew what was happening, and so it was also not encouraging me to continue in order to find out what had happened. I will say that my experience with the second one has improved slightly. So I actually also realized throughout this that I had also read this one, but my memory of this one was way more vague, so I really couldn't remember too much about it. And so I had a bigger enjoyment of like figuring out what was happening and things like that throughout this one. And so I will continue on with the third one and the fourth one. As I said before, I definitely want to finish with those ones throughout this month, and only then give it a go, and only then like decide, will I keep picking this up, or will I or will I decide that they're not for me anymore. In any case, I did quite enjoy this, but I do feel like it's very much formulaic, so it's very much following a certain formula, and I really hope that at some point it will turn away from the formula. So a lot of times here misunderstandings will happen, or bad situations are prospering because adults are not taking children seriously. So the children are realizing what is happening. They're trying to warn the adults, and the adults just won't listen to them. And that's fine if that happens for a few times, but I do hope at some point these books will go in a different direction and will actually show adults who are trusting, but even when they trust them, things still go wrong, for example. So I do hope that this sort of shifts will happen in one of the future books, because if they're always going to be following the same formula, then I'm pretty sure that I will be stopping after the fourth one. But so we'll wait and see what I think about them in future books. But so yeah, so we are now at like the halfway point of the challenge, also the halfway point of the month, of course. So I finished 7 out of the 13 books that I have on my list at the beginning of this video. So I finished over 1,000 books. I have 1,000 pages. I have 800 pages to go, and so as far as the reading so far is concerned, there are 2 clear winners, and that is the Housekeeper and the Professor. And that is the Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa, and the Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. So a big win for Japanese female literature, clearly. So I do still have 1 Japanese novel to go, but I'm kind of like saving it for the end of this challenge. So I am going to be focusing more on the other ones first. I am leaving for London as well in 2 days, so I will be spending 3 days there. So I will leave on the 17th, come back on the 19th. I don't expect to be reading a whole lot during those days, but I will probably be taking the 3rd book of the series of Unfortunate Events with me, just because that's like, yeah, you kind of fly through it based on the fact that it's a middle grade novel, so I expect to be able to, even though I won't get around to reading a lot at that point, I will still be flying through some pages in that sense. So possibly you will most likely you will only have an update from me after I return from London, and then I'm actually getting ready to go on a holiday to Tenerife, so to the Canary Islands. Hey everyone, it's been a long time since my last update, because basically 2 holidays have passed by since I last updated you guys. So let me first pick up where I left off. So right before going to London for the extended weekend, I finished 1 more book, and that is the Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen. I don't have too much to say about this, because I felt like it wasn't just the Beautiful Cassandra, it were like a collection of like 4 to 6, I'm not entirely sure how many, shorter like stories a little bit, and so it really felt like I was expecting some sort of like a cohesion, and then the Beautiful Cassandra itself was only like, it's only like 4 pages, and so I don't really know why they do that. I think this is like going to be the final one that I buy in this Penguin Shorts edition, because I just feel like I'm expecting this like 1 short story, or maybe like 2, as it was in the case of Tolstoy. But here you get like a mix of them, and it's just like, I guess it's a bit of a introduction into an artist's work, but I was just expecting a little bit more of like an emphasis on the short story itself and not on the author, and so I didn't necessarily enjoy it too much. I liked the separate pieces well enough, you know, they were very, very short, so there wasn't too much that I can really say about them, but I didn't really enjoy the overall experience of this short collection. And then I went on my London trip, and then reading really took a sidestep altogether, because I didn't read at all, I think, in London. I maybe read like a couple of pages while I was there, or like on a Eurostar there and back, but basically nothing got done in that time period. And then in the days afterwards, I must admit that I kind of got into sort of like a little bit of a slump, I guess, which is a bit sad. I guess it's due to the book that I was reading, sadly, but it is a bit sad, because like I was expecting this month with the short books to really be flying through them, and so I really felt like that was the case for the first half of this month, but then in the final half of this month, because actually it is the 31st of January while I'm filming this, I kind of lost steam a little bit there. So the next book that I finished is not the book that made me feel slumpy, but is the third book in a series of unfortunate events, The White Window. I do believe that I also read this one, or at least in part read this one, because certain parts of the plot definitely, like they were definitely familiar to me. As with the previous ones in this series, I enjoyed them, nothing really more. I am currently on the fourth one actually, and I'm enjoying it a little bit more, so maybe it's just because I had already read them at some point, and so the plot was also not really like, it was a renewal for me, and that way like it wasn't as exciting for me as it had been the first time around. The book that got me a little bit slumpy is, sadly enough, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. So Calvino is the author of one of my favorite books of all times, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, and Invisible Cities sadly didn't do it for me, and that's definitely due to the structure. I think there's something there. It's definitely written in a way that it's very intentional the way it's written, and I definitely think that you can take things out of it, but I was just definitely not in the mindset for this type of read, and yeah, it definitely kind of put me off of reading it. So we are introduced to Marco Polo in this book, who is describing the different cities that he visits to his like his sort of like ruler, the Khan, and basically we get descriptions of cities one after the other. These descriptions are like a page, 2 pages maybe, and some interesting aspects are being put in the foreground for these cities. Some interesting elements are introduced, but the whole format of just like going off of city description after city description just made that my mind would just start to wander all of the time, that I really couldn't keep my attention to it, because there wasn't a really like a goal to it. You know, you weren't describing these cities because you were gonna have your story set in take place in these cities. You're just describing city after city after city, and there's this overall element to it that if I hadn't read the back of the book, I would have never realized in any case. But so this didn't necessarily do it for me. I think it has interesting elements about cities, about the way cities are described, but yeah, sadly it's not really what I would call an enjoyable read. Therefore I don't really recommend it neither. I think I ended up giving it still like a 3-star read, 3-star rating, because I do feel like there are some interesting elements being brought up there, and that it is doing something interesting. I just don't think that I was in the right headspace for it, but I still think it was solid in what it was trying to do. It was just not for me in that sense, so I only gave it a 3-star rating for that reason. So this was a little bit of a downer for me. It was also the book that took me the longest out of all of these. So I think it was 10 days for a 150-page book, so that's definitely quite a lot. But so yeah, definitely if you're interested in this type of like sort of experimental writing, it's something that you could check out. But I will say, like, if you find yourself drifting at in the beginning of the book, this will not change. This will be kind of the way it will be for you for the entire book. Then you will have to kind of like force yourself to focus on it a little bit more, and so yeah, definitely make that decision for yourself whether you want to do that or not. Definitely made it clear to myself how difficult it is for me to DNF a book, because I definitely considered it at this I definitely considered it when I was like around the 50-page mark or something. I was just definitely saying to myself like, I'm having such a difficult time getting through it, but because I loved Italo Calvino's other work, I really wanted to see where he was going with this one. And it's not like it's going to some sort of a big revelation or some sort of like, it's not like at the end of the book you suddenly realize what he was trying to say with this book. So I think it's a book that you can actually reread a lot of times if you are interested in it, in order to kind of get at like all of the elements that are in there, all of the dimensions that are in there, because there's also some experimental stuff going on with the naming of the different chapters. I'm pretty sure that there's probably also something to be found in the naming of the different cities and things like that. So I do think that it's something that you could dive into a lot, but sadly I didn't feel enough of a connection to this book to want to dive into it, to want to understand what was happening. Next up, I luckily turned things around again by finishing Life for Sale by Yukio Mushigama. That's totally not his name. Next up I finished Life for Sale by Yukio Mishima, and luckily this turned things around. Another one of the Japanese literary books that I read this month, another one on the win side. So the 2 other Japanese novels I read this month have been 5 stars. This one I'm ending up on a 4-star rating just because it didn't blow me away the way the other 2 did. I mean, the other 2 I was just like so much in love with them. This one I thoroughly enjoyed, but it didn't have that like extra element to me. So as I probably introduced in the beginning, I think Life for Sale is about a guy who's he's sick of life. I think he made a suicide attempt, and then he decides that he will put his life for sale and see what happens. And this book really feels like a big dream. It basically is something that happens in Japanese literature a lot. I feel like definitely Haruki Murakami can also be read in that way. It feels like what is happening is like a dream sequence, you know, you're going from one absurd situation to another. Some things are possible that aren't really possible in real life, you know, there are some vampires in this, for example. And so this, our main character is thrown into very weird situations, and it very much feels like a dream state. So I really enjoyed this book. I definitely think it's a lot more on the lighter side, as in so like while it is dealing with things like willpower, you know, our main character at the beginning of the book has tried to commit suicide. When he is unsuccessful at committing suicide, he decides that in order for him to want to continue to living, he will just put his life for sale and will let somebody else decide what he needs to do with his life. And then gradually we see certain and then at certain points in the book we have these questions about what it means to live, what it means to live for yourself, you know. He is often seen as not caring about his life, but then in other times he seems to be questioning like, is this a type of a decision that I would make if I didn't care about my life at all? So it's very much about these elements as well, but as a whole I think it stays very light throughout. And at first that was kind of my, it's kind of what was putting me off a little bit in a way, because it was very like sequential. It was very much like one person buys his life, the situation resolved in a way, and another person buys his life. It was very much like a procedural, for example, and I really don't like that. I really don't like separate plots. I like a big overarching story, but in the end we got a little bit of that overarching story into this plot as well. So definitely recommend it to people who have read Japanese literature, want more Japanese literature to read. So I definitely thought it was entertaining and I liked it. It's just not one of the best ones that I've read, for example. And like, yeah, if you're interested in something like weird, something dreamlike, then definitely this is also a good recommendation for you. And then we are up to the final book that I've finished at this point, and that would be Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So I am so happy that I finished this one, because it's been on my shelf for a very long time, and Virginia Woolf is one of those authors that I've been wanting to try out for a very long time, but I've also been very much like intimidated by her, because she is very much inspired by James Joyce, by Ulysses, and so she also writes in stream of consciousness. And when I was a student we had to read 30 pages of Ulysses, and I never got around to it. I don't think I finished 8 pages even. I just couldn't. I was just so lost. I was just like wondering like, what did I just read? And I would have to start rereading, and then have the same thing happen all over again. And so my doubt was that the same would happen with Virginia Woolf, and that was definitely not the case. But so this definitely didn't happen with Mrs. Dalloway. Mrs. Dalloway was very beautiful language, very lyrical. You are constantly like sliding from one perspective into the other, a little bit like as if you are following the wind or something, in a sense, because like it's almost like a camera perspective where the camera is gliding towards other people in frame. So you will have Mrs. Dalloway walking through London, and then she will meet and then she will cross paths with certain people and the perspective might shift to these people, for example. So we are following Mrs. Dalloway for a 12-hour period in her life, but we're not just following Mrs. Dalloway. So in advance I thought it was just only Mrs. Dalloway perspective, but we're actually following a rather big range of perspectives. So we're shifting from very different people. Most of them all have some part in her life, are acquaintances, are relatives of Mrs. Dalloway, but there are also some people who have a different impact on her life, which will reveal itself later on in the novel. And so we're getting a very broad perspective on the English society at that time, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed looking into all of these people's life. I can't say that I always fully followed like whose perspective we were following from the first second, for example. The shifts are sometimes very subtle. I do recommend listening to the audiobook for this, just because it helped me to kind of stay into the flow, just to kind of follow what was going on. However, I also had an annoying audiobook that from time to time would just like be repeating certain passages and then skip over others. So I did have to keep like the physical copy with me for that one, but hopefully that might just be my audiobook. I might just have had a bad one for that one. So definitely be aware of that situation when going into the audiobook, that there's a possibility that you will have the same flaw in your audiobook. But so yeah, it definitely was engaging, and I definitely continued along, and it gave me an appreciation for a stream of consciousness that I didn't expect, because I really did love the flow of things, the writing of it. So I definitely want to give other Virginia Woolfs a go in order to see like this writing style reoccur and hopefully find a bigger connection with the plot or with the characters in it. And I find it difficult to rate this book because it's kind of small in its plot. It's very much more focused on characters, and in that sense we are following many different characters, so we get a wide perspective of characters, but that also means not necessarily a whole lot of character development. There is definitely some introspection into certain characters, a lot more than into others, and there's definitely a lot of interesting things being brought to the front, but it makes it a bit difficult for me to rate this book and to rate my experience with this book. So I landed on a 3-star rating, but I definitely think it's more like a 3.5, 3.8 maybe even. I just don't think it deserves my 4-star rating, but I definitely enjoyed having this experience with Virginia Woolf's book. And so that brings me to my current read, which I don't have with me at the moment, I see. But so I'm currently finishing the final book off of this secret TBR, so I do hope to be able to finish in time. So I still have a couple of hours left, and it is a short book, clearly. And I'm like I'm past the 100-page point at this point, so I'm past halfway through it. I started yesterday evening, and it is a children's book, so it goes really fast. And so that is, of course, the 4th book in the series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. And I'm enjoying it a lot right now. I said earlier that I was enjoying it more than the previous ones, and I don't know whether that's just because I was not aware of the plot here, and definitely sure that I never read this one. With the other ones, while reading it, I was starting to feel like, oh yeah, right, I did read this. But this one I haven't had that at this point. It's also been interesting to see sort of like the plots happening there. So before we had very much the same formula. This is still the case, but like one of the elements introduced in this book is like hypnosis, and that means that some of the characters are acting out of character, which was a nice change as well. So I'm going to make this final update about the secret TBR quite casual, with my hair still drying, wearing my robe, so completely comfortable at this moment. But yeah, I'm not gonna wait around for my hair to dry, because then I'll probably lose light, because we are at the time of year where I have almost no natural light throughout the day. So I am happy at this point that I'm getting some filming done. I do want to still film my TBR for February today, and hopefully my wrap up for January, but I do want to wait for my hair to dry for those ones, so I don't know whether I'll be able to get around to those. But so the final book that I finished it last night, so still in time for January, is The Miserable Mill, the 4th book in the series of unfortunate events. And as I was saying yesterday in my previous in my previous update. I'm really enjoying this a lot more than I enjoyed the first 3, and I definitely think I want to continue. So what this book did was it turned around some of this sort of like it turned this sort of like formula upside down a little bit. So it had been very formulaic before in the first 3 books, and so in this book we kind of like see an upset into like these sort of formulas. So as I said before, one of the kids is like hypnotized, and so he starts behaving differently than otherwise, and so we get like some changes in behavior, and so as a result the kids have to kind of like do things that they are not normally best at. So they'll have to like do things that normally one of their siblings would do. So I really like that, and as I said in the previous update, I think I saw a video of somebody who read all 13 in 24 hours, and she was saying how the first 4 books are very much still like standalone formulaic books, and then you get a sort of like overarching plot that starts to develop, and a lot more mystery elements and a lot more like secrets that you're trying to uncover. And so for that reason I'm going to continue, because as I said in the beginning, after reading the first one, I was going to kind of wait it out and see if it stayed to this formula or if it was going to like break that formula a little bit, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to do that. I also think they are very enjoyable to read, very fast reads, and so in that sense it's not a chore to get through them, while it was a little bit of a chore for me to get through the first one, for example. So that's the final one for my secret TBR, so I managed to do it. At some point, I think like 3 days before the end of the month or something, I was really considering just saying like, okay, just stop here, it's fine, you don't need to finish all of them, you know. This month was a month about not focusing too much on a TBR, not really setting those high expectations for myself, and so I set a secret TBR so that nobody was aware of it, just me. That's just like a sort of stupid mental thing that where I was putting expectations on myself because of having informed you guys about what I was going to read, so at the end I was sort of like starting to feel like I wasn't going to be able to finish in time, and I was starting to feel that sort of pressure again, even though I hadn't felt it at any other point in the month so far. And so at that point I was really telling myself like, look, just stop. 11 out of 13 is fine. You don't need to finish the last 2. Maybe try and finish Mrs. Dalloway, but don't put the pressure on yourself to then finish another book as well. But then I watched that video of this other booktuber who read all 13 series of unfortunate events in 24 hours, and I got really excited for seeing like how this 4th one would develop, and that really got me pumped. Also the fact that she read them in 24 hours really made me think like, okay, I should be able to finish this one quickly. So then at that same point I also switched to the audiobook for Mrs. Dalloway, and then I basically finished Mrs. Dalloway a couple of hours later, and so I was getting a sort of like second steam, and so I was very happy to be able to finish it. Overall I would say that I had very different expectations for this month than what the reality turned out to be. I'm not saying that as a sort of disappointment or anything like that, but beginning of this month my reading was going so fast that I was sort of like feeling like I will be finishing this secret TBR so soon in the month, and then I'll have all this time to just pick up whatever I want to, but in the end that really didn't happen. And it's not to say that I had a sort of like slump. I do know that in the middle of the month, when I was like going to London for the weekend and then the days between London and my holiday, I wasn't reading a lot, and that also definitely has to do with the one book that I was reading at that time. But I wouldn't necessarily consider that a slump neither. I was taking a very short break from reading, but still I ended up reading a lot less than I thought I was going to read, but I'm very happy with the reading that I did do this month. So some of the books I read I definitely didn't enjoy that much, and I should have maybe put down, but because they were so short I definitely didn't want to do that. And as I've probably previously established, I am horrible at DNFing books, but I did actually DNF a book this month, which I haven't told you about because it wasn't part of the secret TBR. I just had a non-fiction on audio, and I decided to to leave that one off at a certain point because I just wasn't focusing on it. But so I managed to finish the 13 books on my TBR for this month. Overall I read 2,000, and don't remember exactly how much it was, I think 2,060 or something like that pages across these 13 books. As I said at the beginning of this video, the goal was to finish all of my under 200 pages books, and I managed to do that, but not entirely. So I finished those 13 books. 2 of them were actually longer than 200 pages. One of them I knew in advance that it was longer because it was the 3rd book in the series of unfortunate events, and since the 4th book was under 200 pages, I decided that I would also put in the 3rd book, which was just over 200 pages. But then there was another book, the Dear Friends from My Life I Write to You in Your Life by Yi-Yoon Lee, which was a little bit over 200 pages, so I hadn't counted like the afterword in my page count, but I ended up reading the afterword because I ended up wanting to see like what she had to say about her book and what she had intended with it. So I actually did read more than 200 pages in that book as well. So and then the real reason why it's a little bit of a why it is a little bit of a fail is that I bought 4 more books this month, and 2 of them are under 200 pages. But at some point I was thinking whether I wanted to include them still in this month. Definitely in those final 3 days when I was like starting to feel like I wouldn't even make the original selections of 13 books, I definitely decided not to even try to add those other 2 books. But also one of them is a collection of poems, and I definitely didn't want to kind of like fly through them. I definitely want to be taking my time with them. But so yeah, you will be seeing more about those in my wrap-up. So if you want more of my thoughts on these books, so you've had the thoughts that I had right after them, if you want sort of like conclusion about my feelings about these books, then definitely watch my wrap-up, which will be coming up soon, in which I will be giving like my in which I will be trying to give a comprehensive look at like these 13 books and what I thought about them. I will also start in this year to include my book hauls in my wrap-up, so you will be seeing the books that I've read along with the new books that I'm adding to my bookshelves. So yeah, look forward to, I hope you're looking forward to that video. I'm definitely looking forward to filming it. In another way, I'm like, revisiting all those 13 books. Normally my wrap-ups are like 6 books or something, and that's already a lot. So 13 books is gonna be a lot of talking, and I'm gonna have to really try and keep myself, try to keep myself from like going on like entire spree of talking as I'm doing right now. So yeah, see you guys for the next one. Bye!